Some winters do not come down from the sky so much as rise out of the ground, out of empty cupboards and old debts and the silence between people who have quit asking for mercy. A body can bear cold for a time, but hunger has a voice that keeps calling long after the wind has gone still. There are folks who steal because their hands are wicked, and there are folks who hide bread under a shawl because a child is waiting with blue lips in a room no fire can warm. Out on the Wyoming line in the winter of 1886, one trail of small footprints through white country taught a hard man what love looks like before it has the courage to speak. Inez Boone ran from the back door of Braddock's Mercantile with a wool blanket clutched tight against her ribs, the bread inside it still warm enough to breathe through the weave. Snow drove sideways across the alley behind the store in Carbon County, Wyoming territory, blinding the horse trough, burying the ash barrel, wiping the plank steps clean before her boots had fully left them. Her left glove was split at the thumb, and every time she gripped the bundle tighter, heat from the loaves touched the scarred skin of her palm like a sin and a blessing both. Behind her, the kitchen door slammed. Inez Boone, she did not turn. The wind took Mr. Braddock's voice and tore it into pieces, but shame carried better than sound. It found her even through the blizzard. It struck the back of her neck, where her hair had come loose from its pins and frozen in dark ropes against her collar. She cut past the livery wall, ducked under a sagging clothesline hard with ice, and nearly went to her knees when one boot broke through a crusted drift. The blanket shifted. One round loaf rolled against her elbow. She caught it through the wool as if catching a child. Not for me, she thought, though no one had asked. Not for me. Her breath came thin and burning. 2 cabins waited beyond the South Wash, past the abandoned freight shed and the black skeleton of cottonwoods along Bitter Creek. In one of them, Widow Mara Pike had 3 children and a stove with no flour left in the bin. In the other, old Mr. Voss lay coughing beneath a quilt that smelled of vinegar and camphor, too proud to beg and too weak to chop wood. Inez had spent the morning washing dishes in Braddock's kitchen for day-old heels and a sack of meal. Then the storm had doubled, the road had closed, and she had seen the tray of unsold bread cooling by the stove, while Braddock argued prices with a cattleman out front. She had not meant to hide the bread. She had only meant to ask, but asking had brought his eyes to her patched dress, her father's old boots on her feet, and the flour dust in her hair from work she had done for less than half a wage. You Boones have had enough charity, he had said. So she wrapped the loaves in the blankets she had brought for Mara's smallest boy, and slipped out before pride could starve anyone else. If you're listening from a warm room tonight, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches some quiet place in you, share it, like it, and subscribe so another lonely heart might find its way to the fire. By the time Inez reached the wash, the town behind her was only a smear of yellow lamps. The storm had swallowed the church steeple, the telegraph poles, the wagon road, everything men used to tell themselves they had conquered a place. Snow filled her bonnet brim. Ice clung to her lashes. Twice she stopped to press the blanket beneath her coat and feel for the shape of the bread. Still there? A hoarse scream somewhere in the white dark. Inez froze. Not a long scream, not a frightened colt. It was the sharp sound a saddle horse makes when the ground gives under him or something strikes too near. She turned her face into the wind and saw nothing at first but snow. Then a lantern swung, low and wild. A dim amber bead vanishing and coming back. "Ho!" a man shouted. The voice was deep, cut rough by coal. Inez knew it. Everyone in Barlow Crossing knew it. Hayes Turner. His ranch lay 10 miles north, where the open range rolled hard and treeless toward the Medicine Bow. He came to town seldom and never lingered. Folks said he had more cattle than friends, more land than laughter, and a house so empty that even the wind sounded embarrassed passing through it. Children ran quiet when he stepped into the mercantile. Men nodded to him, but not too familiarly. Women lowered their voices. Inez had seen him once at church in a black coat too worn at the cuffs for a rich man and too clean for a careless one. He had stood in the back, holding his hat with both hands, his eyes fixed on the floorboards when the hymn began. Now he was in the wash below her, half bent over a bay gelding that had plumbed through crusted snow into a hidden rut. His lantern lay on its side, flame fluttering behind glass. One rein dragged loose. Hayes had one hand on the horse's neck and the other pressed to his own thigh. Inez should have gone on. Mara's children were waiting. The bread was cooling. Braddock might already be telling someone, but the horse trembled hard enough to shake snow from its mane, and Hayes Turner's hat was gone, his dark hair white with ice. "You hurt?" she called. His head snapped toward her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his gaze dropped to the bundle under her coat. She felt it like a hand. "I said, are you hurt?" she called again. The bay tried to lunge. Hayes gripped the cheek strap and spoke low, not gentle, exactly, but steady. "Horse is worse than me." That was not an answer, so Inez climbed down into the wash. The drift came over her knees. She slid the last few feet and caught herself on a frozen willow. Hayes watched her come, and in his face she saw suspicion first, not anger. Suspicion, tired and quick, the kind that had learned to stand ready before any kindness entered the room. "Tracks back there yours?" he asked. Inez, chin lifted. "Likely. Braddock's yelling about stolen bread." The wind hissed between them. The bay's breath smoked white. Inez pressed one hand to the bundle and said, "Then he has strong lungs for a man with a full pantry." Hayes' eyes narrowed, not quite in judgment, more as if something inside him had leaned closer. "You admit it." "I admit there are children hungry tonight. That bread for them. And an old man, not for yourself." "I ate yesterday." His face changed so slightly most would have missed it, but Inez had spent her life studying the small weather of people's expressions. When a creditor was about to refuse, when a woman at church had heard gossip, when a child was trying not to cry. Hayes Turner looked down at her boots, soaked and half buried, then back at the blanket beneath her coat. The horse shuddered again. "Hold his head," he said. It was not an offer of mercy. It was work. Inez understood work. She tucked the bread bundle into the lee of a snow-packed bank and took the horse by the bridle, laying one cold hand along the white blaze on his face. "Easy there. Easy, boy." Hayes knelt, grimaced once, and worked his gloved hands down the horse's leg. Snow had packed around a front hoof. The bay had cut himself above the fetlock on something hidden beneath the drift. Might I be a broken barrel hoop, or rusted plow scrap washed down from town? Blood showed black in the snow. "He can walk," Hayes muttered. "If I can get him wrapped." Inez unwound the scarf from her neck. "No," Hayes said. "Yes, that all you've got between you and freezing?" "I've got a temper. It runs warm." For the first time, something like breath without pain left him. Not a laugh, but close enough to show he remembered how. She tied the scarf as he held the horse steady. Her fingers fumbled. Hayes reached to help, and his gloved hand brushed hers. They both pulled back as if the touch had burned. The lantern dimmed. "Where are you taking the bread?" he asked. "South Cabins. You want make it there and back in this?" "I wasn't aiming to come back." He looked at her then, really looked, taking in the patched coat, the hollow beneath her cheekbones, the small bundle hidden under the bank, the way she stood between him and the wind with no thought for whether he deserved it. "Where do you live?" "Room behind Mrs. Bell's laundry. When she lets me, and tonight." Inez said nothing. Hayes' jaw tightened. "Get your bread. I can manage." "Didn't say you couldn't." "Then why say it like an order?" "Because that storm's about to close the wash, and my ranch is closer than those cabins if we cut north along the creek bed. The children are south. My line shack is south first, half-mile, stove, flour, salt pork, if the mice left it. We take the bread there. I'll fetch the Pike children and Voss with the wagon when the wind drops. You fetch them. Yai, via horse holes. Why? Snow beat against his face. He looked older in it, though he could not have been more than 35. There was a scar at his temple, pale as thread. Because you asked without asking, he said. That was all. Inez retrieved the blanket. Hayas took the lantern and led the limping bay while Inez walked beside him. One hand under the bread, one hand ready to catch the horse's bridle if the animal stumbled. They moved like strangers tied by a single piece of rope. Awkward, necessary, neither trusting the other enough to speak. The line shack appeared only when nearly upon it. A low structure pressed into a stand of wind-bent cottonwoods. Snow had banked halfway up the door. Hayes gave Inez the lantern and used his shoulder to force it open. Inside smelled of old ashes, mice, leather, and cold iron. No place had ever looked more beautiful. Inez set the bread on a rough table and went straight to the stove. It was a little cast-iron thing with one cracked lid and a pipe that rattled under the wind. She found kindling in a box, dry enough at the bottom. Hayas brought in an armload of split cottonwood from under a tarp outside, moving stiffly now, favoring his right leg. You're hurt, she said. Bruised. Sit. Horse first. Sit, Mr. Turner. He turned at the sharpness in her voice. I know how to wrap a horse's leg, she said. I know how to light a stove, thaw bread, and make coffee out of grounds another woman would throw away. Sit before you fall and become one more heavy thing the storm expects me to carry for 3 beats. He seemed undecided whether to be offended. Then he sat. Inez worked. She built the fire low and careful, coaxing the flame as if it were a frightened creature. She found a tin coffee pot, rinsed it with snow melt, and set it on to boil. She tore one loaf into thick pieces and laid them near the stove, not too close. Waste was a sin of the comfortable. When the room gained a thread of warmth, she went back out with high eyes, clean rag, and a strip cut from her petticoat hem, and wrapped the horse's wound, while the bay leaned his great head against her shoulder. When she came back inside, Hayes had stood and was reaching for the coffee pot. Don't, she said. I can pour coffee. You can bleed through your trousers too, but that doesn't make it wise. His eyes flickered downward. A dark patch had spread along his thigh, where the horse must have thrown him against rock or metal under the snow. Inez found his bedroll on a shelf and pointed. Sit there, Inez Boone, he said slowly, as if testing the name. She did not answer. I'm not accustomed to being tended. That is plain. Again, that almost laugh. She knelt in front of him with a lantern. I see. The question hung warmer than the stove. Hayes' expression closed. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he unbuckled his gun belt, laid it on the table away from her hands, and lifted the torn cloth enough for her to see the gash. It was not deep enough to kill, but it had bled plenty and needed cleaning. You carry whiskey? She asked. In the saddlebag, for drinking or wounds? Depends on the day. She fetched it, cleaned the cut, and wrapped it tight with linen from an old flour sack. He did not make a sound. That troubled her more than if he had cursed. When she was done, she poured coffee into 2 tin cups. Into his she put the larger share. Onto a plate she laid 2 pieces of bread and a sliver of salt pork found hanging from a nail. Then she placed the plate beside him and stood back. He looked at it, then at the blanket still heavy with loaves. You don't eat? The bread is counted. By whom? By the mouse I took it for. He pushed 1 piece toward her. Then count mine as yours. I did not steal for a rancher with cattle. No, Dota. You helped one who fell in a ditch. I helped your horse. Then eat for the horse's sake. She almost smiled. And because she almost smiled, she hated him a little for seeing it. She took the bread. It tasted of yeast and wood smoke and guilt, and the first swallow hurt her throat. Hayes watched the fire, not her. I did not ask you to. I know. I won't be kept on someone's account book. You already are. Braddock put you there with shame for ink. Her fingers tightened around the tin cup. You think paying makes it clean? No, Hayes said. I think hungry children make it different. The wind slammed against the shack hard enough to shake soot down the stovepipe. Inez flinched. Hayes noticed but did not remark on it. Outside, the horse stamped once. You said Mrs. Bell lets you sleep behind the laundry, he said, when she hasn't rented the space to freight men, and before that. Inez looked at the stove door, where the coals had begun to glow orange. Before that, I had a father with a Bible, a fiddle, and a bad belief that luck owed him money. Hayes took that in quietly. He dead? Not that I've heard. Gone then. Men who leave prefer that word. Hayes' hand rested on his knee, broad and still. My wife left. Inez glanced at him before she could stop herself. He did not look at her, not for another man, for the grave. Fever took her and our boy in the same week. The shack settled around those words. Inez felt them enter the room and stand there beside the stove. She had heard town whispers, a wife buried, a child too. But gossip had made it sound neat, like a folded cloth. There was nothing neat in Hayes' voice, nothing dramatic either. Just a door opened a crack, showing a dark room beyond. I'm sorry, she said. He nodded once. There were many foolish things people said around grief. God's will. Time heals. At least, Inez said none of them. She tore another piece of bread in half and set the larger part on his plate. A while later, when the wind eased from a scream to a long moan, Hayes stood with care. I'm going for the pikes. Your leg will hold. I'll go. No, you said. You weren't ordering. I am now. Her eyes flashed. He reached for his coat, then stopped and looked back. Inez, there's a team in the lean-to and a sled behind the shack. You can hitch better than I can walk? Yes. Then we both go. It was the nearest thing to compromise he seemed able to bear. They hitched the team in weather that cut through wool and skin and pride alike. Inez's hands went numb twice, and Hayes took the lines from her only when she could no longer feel them. They rode south with the lantern hung low, its light skimming the snow. The bread sat between them, in the blanket still giving off a faint warmth. Mara Pike's cabin had no smoke rising from the chimney. Inez was out of the sled before it stopped. She pounded on the door, then lifted the latch and pushed in. The smell of cold sickness met her. 3 children lay on a rope bed under one quilt, their faces pale in the dim. Mara Pike sat on the floor by the stove, one arm around the youngest, her lips cracked. Inez, Mara whispered, I brought Brett. At those 3 words, the oldest boy began to cry. Not loudly. He was 8 and had already learned to be ashamed of needing. Hayes came in behind Inez carrying wood from the sled. He did not introduce himself. He went straight to the stove, cleared ash, laid kindling, and struck a match with hands that did not shake though his leg had begun bleeding again. Inez broke bread into a pan with melted snow and a pinch of salt, making a soft mash for bellies too empty to take much. She fed the smallest girl with a spoon no larger than her thumb, blowing each bite cool. Hayes split kindling on the hearth with his knife. No one spoke of theft. No one spoke of debt. The room filled slowly with firelight steam and the sound of children swallowing. When Mara could stand, they wrapped her and the children in quilts and loaded them onto the sled. At Voss's cabin, Hayes had to break the drift away from the door with a shovel. Old Mr. Voss protested being moved until Inez leaned over him and said, If you die from pride, I'll be the one washing your sheets, and I've done enough laundry for stubborn men, the old man grumbled. But he let Hayes carry him. By dawn, the line shack held 7 souls, 1 wounded horse in the lean-to, and the smell of coffee stretched thin but hot. Children slept on saddle blankets near the stove. Mara leaned against a wall, her eyes closed, one hand resting on the smallest child's hair. Mr. Voss snored with the dignity of a sawmill. Inez stood at the table washing the tin cups with melted snow and a rag. Her back ached, her eyes burned. She had not slept. Hayes sat near the door, watching the window whiten with morning. His leg was stretched stiff before him. He had said little since returning, but every time the fire sank, he fed it. Every time a child stirred, his gaze moved there and waited until they settled. "You can sleep," he said. "So can you." "I don't much. That is not the same as can't." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. A boy whimpered in his sleep. Hayes' hand tightened around the tin, and suddenly Inez understood that the sound had gone through him like a nail. She softened her voice. "What was your boy's name?" For a long while, only the stove answered. "Caleb," Hayes said. Inez kept washing the cup. "Van Wyoming. Tarif rich. What name?" "He liked biscuits with molasses. Would put it in his hair if you turned away." The corner of his mouth moved, and the pain of that small, almost smile was worse than tears. Inez set the cup upside down on a towel. "My mother used to make corn cakes on Sundays. She'd save the crisp edges for me. After she died, my father burned them every time and said it was the pan's fault." Hayes looked down. "Men blame iron when they don't want to blame their hands." She heard more in that sentence than he had said. Outside, the blizzard loosened at last, not ending, but tiring. Gray light showed the world buried to the fence rails. It would take a day to clear the track back to town. Might be two. By noon, Hayes' hired man, Silas Crone, found them. He came in on a mule with icicles hanging from his beard and alarm in his eyes. "Boss," he said, staring at the roomful of people. "Whole town's riled. Braddock says he robbed him blind. Sheriff's asking." Hayes stood too fast and gripped the table. Inez felt the room turn toward her. Mara opened her mouth, but Inez shook her head once. Children did not need more fear. "I'll go back," Inez said. Hayes' voice came low. "No, I won't have them drag Mara into it. Or you. They won't drag anyone. You cannot decide that." Hayes looked at Silas. "Hitch the wagon when the road clears enough. Bring blankets from the ranch house. Flour, beans, coffee, all of it." Silas blinked. "All a hungry person can use." The hired man's eyes went from Hayes to Inez and back. Something like approval hid under his frost. "Aye, sir. And tell Braddock I'll speak to him myself." Inez sat, both hands flat on the table. "I told you I won't be bought clean." Hayes turned to her. "Then don't be clean. Be right." It struck her strangely, that word. Right. Not innocent, not excused, right. She did not know what to do with a man who could tell the difference. The storm held them another night. In close quarters, a person's nature had little room to hide. Mara apologized for the children's coughing. Inez made her stop. Old Voss complained about the coffee until Hayes gave him the last spoonful of sugar, and then he complained quieter. The oldest pike boy, Thomas, followed Hayes with wary eyes, clearly unable to decide whether a rich rancher was something like a sheriff or something like a bear. Inez found chores in every corner. She shook snow from blankets, mended a torn mitten, scraped burned porridge from the pan, and hung socks near the stove on a length of twine. Hayes watched her turn a sack meant for one man into something like a refuge. Not pretty, not easy, but ordered, warm at the edges, alive. That evening, when the children were eating beans softened in snowmelt with bits of bread, Thomas looked at Hayes and said, "You got cows." "I do." "How many?" "Enough to make me tired." Thomas considered that. "You got chickens?" "No, why not?" Hayes seemed caught off guard by the seriousness of the question. "Never kept any. My ma says hens make a place less lonesome." Mara flushed. "Thomas, Hayes looked at the boy, then at Ines, who was pretending not to listen while she wiped the table. "Maybe your ma's right," he said. The words settled softly. On the third morning, they returned to Barlow Crossing. The town looked smaller under snow. Its buildings crouched like guilty animals. Smoke rose from chimneys. Men shoveled storefronts. Women stood behind frosted windows. News had traveled faster than any horse. By the time Hayes' wagon rolled down Main Street with Mara, the children, old Voss, and Inez seated among blankets and empty breadcloths, faces had gathered at doors. Braddock stood outside the Mercantile in a buffalo coat, his cheeks red from indignation and cold. "There she is," he called. "I want the sheriff." Hayes stopped the wagon. The street went still, except for the jingle of harness and the scrape of wind-blown snow on the boards. Inez climbed down before Hayes could move. She would not cower in a wagon like contraband. Her boots hit the packed snow. Her legs trembled with weariness. But she faced Braddock. "I took the bread," she said. A murmur passed along the street. Braddock pointed a gloved finger. "Thief!" Hayes stepped down beside her, slower because of his leg. "Careful, I'll call a thing what it is. So will I," Hayes said. The sheriff, Amos Dyer, came from his office pulling on his coat. He was a decent man when decency was inexpensive, which meant he looked troubled now. "Miss Boone," he said, "did you take goods from Mr. Braddock without payment?" "Yes." Braddock lifted his chin in triumph. Inez held her shoulders straight. "I took 6 loaves of bread. They fed Widow Pike's children, Mr. Voss, and the rest of us caught in the storm. After I refused charity," Braddock snapped. "That don't make it hers." "No," Inez said. "It makes it needed." Some of the women looked away. One did not. Mrs. Bell from the laundry stood with red hands tucked under her apron, watching Inez with an unreadable face. Hayes reached into his coat and took out a folded banknote. "Here's payment for the bread at full price." Braddock grabbed for it. Hayes did not release it. "And here," Hayes continued, drawing another note, "I ask payment for every loaf you had left that night, whether it's spoiled or sold." Braddock's eyes brightened. "And here," Hayes said, voice hardening, "I ask payment for one public apology to Miss Boone." The storekeeper's mouth fell open. "You can't buy that?" "No, dar, but I can buy my flour, beans, tack, lamp oil, nails, coffee, sugar, cloth, and winter feed from Rollins from now till the day they lower me into the ground." A silence follows so complete that Inez heard a horse blow steam behind her. Braddock's face darkened. "You threatening me?" "I'm choosing where my money keeps company." The sheriff rubbed his jaw. Mara Pike stood up in the wagon, thin as a reed but steady. "My children ate because of her." Old Voss lifted one bony hand from his blanket. "I ate too, against my better judgment." A small laugh moved through the crowd, not mocking, but relieving. Thomas Pike looked ready to fight anyone who stepped nearer. Mrs. Bell came forward then. She carried something under her shawl. Inez recognized it before the woman spoke. Inez's small carpet bag, the one with her mother's brass thimble and spare stockings inside. "You left this at the laundry," Mrs. Bell said. Inez felt cold of a different sort. "I was coming back for it." "I know," Mrs. Bell swallowed. "Runes rented now." There it was. Quiet cruelty in a tidy bonnet. Hayes looked at the carpet bag, then at Inez. He did not reach for her. He did not declare anything grand. He only said, "There's room at the Turner Ranch." Every face turned. Inez stared at him. He seemed to hear how it sounded only after the words had left him. His jaw tightened. "For work," he added. "Housekeeping, cooking, wages, a room with a lock, until spring, or longer if you choose." Braddock sneered. Mighty generous to a thief. Hayes turned on him with such stillness that the man stepped back. "She has a name," Hayes said. Use it. No one spoke. Inez's throat burned. She had been defended before by women who pitied her, by preachers who liked a lesson, by neighbors as long as it cost them nothing. Never like this. Never with her name placed in the street like something worth guarding. She took the carpetbag from Mrs. Bell. What wages? Hayes blinked. If I'm to work? I know the wages. Silas, from the wagon seat, coughed into his glove to hide a smile. Hayes named a fair amount. More than fair. Inez lowered it by a third. I'm not taking charity, she said. No, Hayes replied. You're taking a position. Then I'll earn the first month before I accept coin. You'll accept food from the table. Ice held in the cold. I'll cook it. You'll eat it. Their eyes held in the cold. Finally she nodded. I'll eat what I cook. That might be the first sensible bargain made in this town all winter, old Foss said. So Inez Boone went to the Turner Ranch not as a rescued woman, not as a wife, not as anything the town could comfortably name, but as a worker with a carpetbag at her feet and 6 loaves of bread following her like a rumor. The ranch house stood north of town where the land opened wide and merciless. Snow lay blue in the hollows. Cottonwoods marked the creek. The barn leaned a little east, as if listening to the wind. Corrals, woodpile, pump, chickenless yard, empty clothesline, and a porch with one broken rail all waited under winter's hand. The house itself was sound, too sound, built by a man who had kept weather out and locked grief in. Inside, dust lay on the parlor furniture. The stove was black and cold, though there was wood stacked near it. One plate sat in the cupboard, one cup, one chair pulled near the kitchen table, the others pushed back against the wall as if company had been banished. A woman's blue shawl hung on a peg near the bedroom door, untouched long enough to hold the shape of absence. Inez saw it and looked away. Hayes saw her see it. That room's shut, he said. I wasn't asking. You can have the room at the back. It was for hired help. Then it will suit me. Silas carried her carpetbag in and set it down, careful not to comment on its lightness. He lived in the bunkhouse with 2 other hands, both wintering cattle and fighting drifts, more than riding. Their names were Clem and Ari. They tipped hats to Inez as if she were a school teacher or a loaded rifle. She nodded back. That first day, she asked for a broom, lye soap, a flour bin, and the location of the pump. Hayes showed her everything without hovering. Then he went to the barn. Inez stood alone in the kitchen. A house tells on its people. This one told of meals taken standing, coffee boiled bitter, ashes left too long, letters unopened on a shelf, mud tracked to the same chair every night, and silence thick as grease on the stove. It was not filth, it was surrender. She removed her coat. By sundown, the stove was lit, the table scrubbed, dishes washed, though there were hardly any, and a pot of beans simmered with salt pork. She found flour, hard and clumped from neglect, sifted what she could, and made biscuits small enough to stretch. When Hayes came in, stamping snow from his boots, he stopped just inside the door. The room smelled of coffee, not ranch coffee boiled to punishment, but coffee with a pinch of salt to soften it, kept warm at the back of the stove. Inez was wiping the table, wash at the basin. He looked toward the basin, then at her. I generally not at my table. The phrase came out before she had waited. My table. Color touched her face. She turned away. Eyes washed. They ate across from each other with the lamp between them. He took one bite of biscuit and paused. Too hard? She asked. No. Too little salt? No. What then? He looked at the biscuit as if it had spoken a language he had forgotten. My wife used to burn the bottoms. Inez set her fork down carefully. I can burn yours tomorrow if it would help. He stared at her. Then he laughed. It was not loud. It did not last. But it entered the room and startled both of them. After supper, he reached for his plate. I wash, Inez said. I dirty. She considered arguing, then handed him the plate. He washed awkwardly, using too much soap and too little confidence. She dried, Their shoulders nearly touched at the basin, and neither moved closer. In the days that followed, winter deepened. Work held them apart and tied them together. Hyas left before dawn to check cattle, break ice at the creek, mend fence where snow-heavy rails had fallen, and see that the horses had feed. Inez rose in darkness, lit the kitchen stove, ground coffee, mixed dough, and carried scraps to imaginary hens before remembering there were none. She cleaned rooms one at a time, not touching the closed bedroom or the blue shawl. She pumped water until her arms shook. She washed laundry in steam that reddened her face and hung shirts indoors where they dripped into pants. She mended Hyas' torn cuffs, patched Silas' glove, and boiled rags clean for his leg, which he pretended did not pain him. Each morning Hyas found coffee waiting. Each evening, Inez found a woodbox filled. Neither mentioned the exchange. On the fifth day, Thomas Pike appeared in the yard with a basket. Inez opened the door to find him red-nosed and solemn, holding 3 eggs cushioned in straw. "Ma says these are for you, from Mrs. Bell's hens, though Mrs. Bell don't know Thomas Pike. She don't feed him right anyway." Behind him, Hyas stood by the corral gate, pretending not to hear. Inez accepted 1 egg and sent 2 back. "Tell your mother I'll come by Sunday." Thomas looked past her into the kitchen. "Mr. Turner got hens yet?" Hyas cleared his throat. "Not yet." The boy's disappointment was severe. That afternoon, Hyas rode to a neighboring place and returned with 6 hens and a proud, ragged rooster in a crate. He set them up in a corner of the barn with more care than he likely gave most visiting men. Inez stood in the barn door, arms folded. "You bought chickens because a child judged you." He made a strong argument. The argument was, "Got hens yet?" Plain speech is often best. The hens muttered in the straw, offended by weather, travel, and life generally. Inez tried not to smile. By the second week, eggs appeared in a blue bowl on the table. Curtains washed and patched went back up in the kitchen. The porch rail was repaired after Inez mentioned that a person could break a neck carrying water in the dark. Hyas fixed the pump handle without being asked, after he saw her wrapping her palm where it had blistered. Inez planted apple seeds in a cracked cup on the sill, though spring was far away and hope looked foolish in Zanri. One night, she found Hyas at the table with a letter in front of him. The envelope was worn soft at the folds. A child's drawing showed on the back, faded but clear enough. A square house, a tall man, a smaller woman, a boy with a round head, and what might have been either a dog or a cow. Above them, in crooked letters, was written Papa. Inez stopped at the stove. Hyas did not hide the letter. He did not offer it either. "Caleb?" she asked. He nodded. The lamp flame moved in the draft. He drew it the week before fever came. Hyas said, kept asking when the house would be yellow. I told him houses weren't yellow out here unless a fool had money for paint. Inez came closer, but not too close. Children like fools with paint. He touched the paper once with his tomb. "I never painted it. That why you keep everything brown." His mouth tightened, but not in anger. "My baby." She looked toward the closed room where the blue shawl hung just outside, like a guard. "My mother had a thimble," Inez said, "brass, dent on one side. I keep it in my bag though I don't use it much." "Why not?" "Afraid I'll lose it." "Things kept shut away still get lost." The sentence belonged to both of them. Hyas folded the letter. "I don't know how to open that room." Inez's voice was quiet. "Then don't tonight." He looked at her, and in his eyes was the weariness of a man who had been offered advice all his grieving life, and had trusted none of it. This was not advice, it was permission. The next morning he left an extra shawl by the kitchen door, not the blue one, a brown wool shawl, plain and warm. Inez found it folded on the chair. She wore it to pump water. Town did not forget her. Towns rarely do when remembering costs nothing. At church, women watched Inez from under bonnet brims, Mr. Braddock refused to look at her while selling lamp oil to Silas. Mrs. Bell told 2 customers that some girls had a way of landing soft after stealing hard. The sheriff gave Hayes a nod heavy with apology and uncertainty. Inez kept her back straight through all of it. She bought needles with her own first-earned coin and paid exact. When Braddock pushed the change across the counter without touching her hand, Hayes reached around her and placed a list on the counter. 50 pounds flour, he said, 20 coffee, sugar, beans, dried apples, and a bolt of blue calico. Braddock's eyes shifted. For your housekeeper? For my house? Inez looked at him sharply. Hayes did not look back. The bolt of calico was not fine, but it was clear as summer sky against the gray store. Inez touched it once, then withdrew her hand. I didn't ask for cloth, she said when they stepped outside. No, then why? Curtains in the kitchen are near gone. They're serviceable. S.O. is a coffin until it isn't. She made a sound halfway between scold and laugh. That is a terrible thing to say about curtains. I am not practiced in speaking of them. Nah, Doris, I can tell. He lifted the sack of flour into the wagon. You don't have to sew them. I know, but that night, after supper, she measured the window. The blue curtains changed the kitchen. No one said so directly. Silas came in for coffee one morning and stood staring at them until Inez asked whether he had never seen cloth before. Clem wiped his boots twice before entering. Ari brought a broken chair from the bunkhouse and asked if she wanted it fixed or burned. Hayes noticed most in silence. A nail placed where Inez needed it. A shelf built above the worktable. A better latch on the back door. A small step by the pump after she slipped in ice. The ranch, under snow and labor, began to wake. Then came the thaw that was not truly thaw, only cruelty changing shape. Days warm just enough to soften snow into mud. Then nights froze it hard. Cattle broke through crust and cut their legs. The creek rose under ice. The road to town turned black and treacherous. With thaw came gossip riding faster. One afternoon, a sleigh arrived while Hayes was out mending fence. Inez was in the yard beating rugs against the line, her sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the cold. She turned to see a woman step down in a fur-trimmed cloak, followed by a young man with city gloves and a narrow mustache. The woman was Mrs. Augusta Vale, Hayes' late wife's aunt. Inez knew by the way she looked at the house before looking at the person standing in front of it. You are Miss Boone, Augusta said. I am. I expected you to be older. I expect many things and survive disappointment. The young man smirked. Augusta did not. I am here to collect certain belongings of my niece, things Mr. Turner has neglected to send. That is for Mr. Turner to answer. It concerns family. Then you should wait in the parlor. Inez said it calmly, but Augusta's eyes sharpened at being directed by the housekeeper. Inside, Augusta removed her gloves finger by finger, surveying the blue curtains, the clean stove, the mended chair, the bowl of eggs, the little cracked cup of apple seedlings on the sill. You've made yourself comfortable. I've made the house workable. The young man, Everett Vale, picked up a biscuit from the covered plate without asking. Inez took the plate away before his second bite. Those are for supper, he laughed. Hayes hires a stern one. I hire myself out. That is different. Augusta's gaze landed on the blue shawl still hanging by the closed room. Her face softened, then hardened. That was Clara's. Inez said nothing. She was gentle, Augusta said. A true lady. This house was meant for her. It still holds her things. And yet, you hang your curtains. The words struck closer than Inez expected. She looked toward the kitchen window. Blue cloth moved in the draft, innocent as sky. Before she could answer, Hayes came in through the back door, muddy to the knees, cold in his eyes the moment he saw Augusta. You should have written, he said. I did 3 times. I didn't open them. No, Hayes, you never do. Everett rose. We've come for Clara's trunk. Her mother wants the christening gown, the silver brush, and the shawl. Hayes's face went still at the word christening. Inez lowered her eyes. Caleb's things. Augusta saw it too late, or perhaps just late enough to wound. We would have asked sooner, but grief made you unreasonable. Hayes took off his gloves slowly. Unreasonable. You shut us out. You buried our Clara in this wilderness and kept every scrap like a miser. The room seemed to shrink. Inez saw Hayes' hand move toward the back of a chair, gripping it not for anger, but balance. The scar at his temple paled. Everett stepped nearer the closed room. Well, just gather what's proper. No, Inez said. Everyone turned. Her heart struck hard, but her voice held. No one opens a shut room in another person's house while he is standing in pain in his own kitchen. Augusta's eyes widened. You forget your place. I know my place. It is between harm and the door when harm comes in, wearing good gloves. Hayes looked at Inez then, and something fierce and frightened crossed his face. Augusta gathered herself. Hayes, are you allowing this woman to speak for you? Hayes' answer was quiet. She speaks well enough. Everett scoffed. She stole bread 2 weeks ago. The room went cold. Hayes moved before Inez could, not violently. He only stepped between Everett and the rest of the kitchen, muddy boots and all. She fed children in a blizzard, Hayes said. What did you do that night? Everett's mouth opened, then closed. Augusta looked from Hayes to Inez, and for the first time saw not a servant, not gossip, but something she could not name and did not like. We will return with the sheriff, if need be. Hayes took the blue shawl from its peg. He held it carefully, almost reverently. Then he placed it in Augusta's hands. This was Clara's, he said. She wore it the day we came here. Take it to her mother. Augusta's face trembled. But the room stays shut, Hayes said. Until I open it, Everett muttered. For how long? Hayes looked toward the door of the room where dust and memory waited. Until I can breathe. No one had an answer for that. After they left, Inez went to the stove and stirred beans that did not need stirring. Hayes stood with his back to the room, one hand pressed flat against the closed door. I shouldn't have spoken, Inez said. Yes, he replied. She swallowed. I shouldn't have. Yes, you should have. The spoon stilled. He did not turn. No one ever stood in front of it before. The door, me, that night. Supper nearly burned. Hayes ate it without complaint. In February, the worst storm came. Old men would later say the first blizzard had only been a warning, a white hand tapping the window. This one arrived like a sentence. All morning the sky lowered green-gray over the range. Cattle bawled uneasy. Horses turned their rumps to the north. Hens crowded inside the barn, offended but wiser than men. Hayes wanted to ride out with Silas, to bring in a small bunch of cattle from the far draw. Inez stood on the porch with a basket of laundry against her hip. Sky says no, cattle say otherwise. Cattle don't write widows. He looked at her. The words had come sharper than she intended, because fear had risen sudden hot in her throat. She busied herself pulling frozen shirts from the line. Hayes stepped closer. Inez, she yanked a clothespin too hard. It snapped. Go then. You think I want to? I think men with sorrow mistake danger for duty. His face changed. Silas, by the barn, suddenly found a strap fascinating. Hayes' voice lowered. That what your father did? Her hands went still. The wind moved between them, smelling of snow and iron. He gambled our rent because he said a man had to risk something, she said. Then he risked my mother's wedding ring, then my mother's health, then my name. When he left, he took the horse and the good quilt. I was 14. I carried my mother's body to the church with neighbors who looked at me like poverty might rub off. Hayes said nothing. Inez turned toward the laundry basket. So yes, I have opinions about men calling hunger, pride, or danger by prettier names. He stood there long enough that she thought he might be angry. Instead, he said, "I'll send Clem and Ori along the near fence. Silas and I stay." It was not surrender. It was trust, rough-edged and unfamiliar. By noon, snow erased the barn from the kitchen window. By 2, Clem and Ori had not returned. By 3, the wind screamed so hard the blue curtains lifted from the wall, though every window was shut. Hayes paced once, twice, then took his coat. Inez was already tying on the brown shawl. "I'm coming." "No, I know where the wash cuts near the old cottonwood." Ori said, "The far gate drifts first. If they came back that way, they'll be blind. You'll freeze. Then walk faster." "Inez," she turned on him, eyes bright. "Do not spend all winter teaching me. This is my home. And then tell me to wait useless in it, while men die outside." His mouth closed. He took down another scarf and wrapped it around her neck himself. His hands were careful, almost clumsy near her face. "Stay behind me," he said. "When it suits sense." He almost smiled. "That is the best I'll get." "Yes." They went into the storm. The world vanished beyond arm's reach. Hayes carried a lantern, though its light was mostly memory. Inez held a rope tied to his belt in one hand and a sack of wrapped biscuits in the other, because hunger could find a man even before death did. Snow struck so hard it felt thrown by fists. Twice Hayes stopped to get their bearings by fence posts buried to their tops. Once Inez went down, and he hauled her up with one arm around her waist, holding a breath too long before letting go. They found Clem first by sound, a faint shout beneath wind. He had taken shelter behind a dead steer near the broken far gate, one boot lost in drift, his foot wrapped in a torn saddle blanket. Ori was farther out, he said, gone after a loose horse. Hayes' face became stone. Inez forced biscuit into Clem's hands. "Eat. I can't chew." "Then hold it in your mouth and disappoint me less." Clem obeyed. They got him to his feet and tied him to the rope. Hayes wanted to send Inez back with him. She refused with a look. They pushed on. The broken gate loomed out of snow like a gallows. Beyond it, the land dipped toward a shallow ravine, where drifts formed deep and treacherous. Inez saw something dark snagged against a fence wire. A hat. Ori's. Hayes went still. Then, faintly, beneath the wind, came a horse's frantic snort. They followed the sound down into the ravine. Ori lay half covered by snow beside a sorrel mare, his leg pinned under a fallen rail. His lips were gray. The mare shook but did not bolt. Hayes dropped to his knees. Ori's eyes opened a slit. "Gate busted, fool boy," Hayes said, voice rough with terror. "You don't get paid enough to die over a gate." Inez was already digging with both hands, snow packed under her nails. Hayes lifted the rail while Clem, swaying, pulled Ori free. But the sorrel panicked at the movement, reared, and the broken rein whipped around Inez's wrist. She cried out as she was jerked forward. Hayes caught the rein and took the force across his injured leg. He went down hard but held on, speaking low to the mare while the storm tried to tear all of them apart. Inez's wrist burned. For one wild moment she saw herself dragged, saw the bread blanket, the wash, every cold mile she had survived, only to end beneath a horse in white country. Then Hayes' gloved hand closed over hers. "Look at me," he said. She did. His face was inches from hers, snow in his brows, blood at his lip where he had bitten it in the fall. "Not letting go," he said. 3 words, no speech, no promise beyond the moment. Yet they reached some locked room inside her and set a lamp there. Together they freed the rein. Getting back took the rest of daylight and some of darkness. Hayes half carried Ori. Inez kept Clem moving with scolds, prayers she did not admit were prayers, and pieces of biscuit tucked against his mouth. At the yard, Silas and Thomas Pike, who had come with his mother to bring eggs before the storm trapped them, met them with lanterns. Mara had a fire roaring and blankets warm. The ranch house filled again with bodies, steam, fear, and work. Ines cut Ari's boot from his swollen foot. Hayes held him down. Mara heated water. Thomas stood pale by the door until Ines handed him a pile of rags and said, "You're useful or you're in the way." The boy became useful. All night, the storm raged. All night, Ines worked. She brewed willow bark tea, warmed bricks for feet, fed broth spoon by spoon, and changed bandages. Hayes moved when she told him, sat when she pointed, lifted when strength was needed, and once, near dawn, poured coffee into her cup before his own. She noticed, so did he. When the crisis passed, when Clem slept, Ari breathed steady, and the storm had worn itself down to a bitter whisper. Ines went to the back porch and stood looking at the buried yard. Her wrist throbbed, her hair had fallen loose, her dress was stained with mud, blood, coffee, and stove ash. Hayes came out behind her. For a while they listened to the towering drip from the eaves. "You saved them," he said. "We saved them. I would have gone alone before. I know, I would have lost one." She turned her head. "My bay." He leaned both hands on the porch rail he had repaired because he had said it was dangerous. "That scares me more than the storm." Inez's breath clouded. Being needed, being kept, the word went between them gently. She looked out at the barn, the corral, the snow-buried garden patch she had already planned in her mind. The line of fence they would have to mend come spring. "I don't know how to stay without owing." Hayes nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "I don't know how to ask without fearing the cost." The house behind them creaked in the cold. A hen complained somewhere in the barn, fierce with life. Hayes reached into his coat and took out a small object. Ines recognized her mother's brass thimble. Her hand flew to her pocket, empty. "You dropped it by the ravine," he said. "Found it caught in your shawl fringe when we came in." She took it from him, her fingers closing tight. "I thought it was gone," she whispered. "I know." The thimble lay warm from his pocket, dented and plain, the last small proof that she had once been someone's cherished child. Hayes said, "Things kept shut away still get lost." She looked at him. The next morning, he opened the closed room. "Not alone?" He asked Ines to stand in the hall. "Not inside unless called." It was the kind of asking that humbled both people. He turned the key. The door stuck, then gave. Dust moved out first, then lavender, faint as a memory. Ines saw only a narrow slice, a trunk at the foot of the bed, a cradle covered with a sheet, a yellowing curtain, a pair of small boots on a chair. Hayes made a sound so low it was almost not sound. Ines stayed in the hall. Every part of her wanted to go to him. Every wise part knew grief sometimes needs one witness and no hands. Minutes passed. At last he said, "I can't lift the trunk." She entered then. Together they opened it. Clara Turner's dresses lay folded with cedar. Beneath them were baby clothes, a silver brush, letters tied in ribbon, and a small christening gown wrapped in blue paper. Hayes touched the gown and closed his eyes. "I was angry," they asked. He said, "You were hurt?" "I was both." Yes." He looked at the cradle. "I thought if I opened this room, it meant I was leaving them." Inez's hand rested on the trunk edge, not touching him. "My bay, it means you can carry them into the rest of the house." That afternoon, Hayes packed the silver brush and christening gown to send to Clara's mother. He kept Caleb's drawing. The small boots he placed on the mantel in the parlor, not hidden, not displayed like a shrine, simply there. That evening, he moved the blue curtained kitchen chair opposite his own and did not push it back. March came hard, with mud to the hubs and wind that smelled faintly of grass beneath snow rot. The ranch became a place of repairs. Fence rails were reset. Harness was oiled. The barn roof patched where storms had worried the shingles loose. Ines ordered seed through the mercantile, though Braddock still served her with lips like a trap. She planted peas near the south wall, turned soil with a hoe, and scolded the rooster for scratching where he was not invited. Hayes built a proper chicken run after finding her chasing hens from the garden with her apron. Thomas Pike came every Saturday to help collect eggs and ask questions about cattle. Mara mended shirts in the kitchen some afternoons and left with flour she insisted was loan. Old Voss sent a jar of chokecherry preserve so sour it made Silas cough and Inez laugh until she had to sit down. With laughter came danger of another kind. The town began to speak differently, not kinder, only more curious. A housekeeper at a widower's ranch was one thing. A woman planting garden, keeping accounts, tending men, sending supplies to neighbors, and riding beside Hayes Turner into town was another. The preacher's wife asked Inez if she had considered her reputation. Inez answered that she had considered many reputations and found most of them poorly fed. Then Everett Vale returned. He came in April when snow survived only in shaded cuts and the roads were passable enough for trouble. This time he brought papers and a lawyer from Rawlins, a thin man named Pritchard, who smelled of ink and damp wool. They arrived while Hayes and the hands were moving cattle to spring pasture. Inez was in the kitchen kneading bread. Everett did not remove his hat. "Mr. Turner here?" "No, well, wait. You'll wait on the porch unless you have business with me." The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Everett smiled. "Business concerns this property and the memory of a decent woman. Not hired help." Inez wiped flour from her hands. "Then you might write a letter." Everett stepped closer. "You've done well for yourself. From stealing bread to running a ranch house." The dough sat under her palms, soft and alive. "What do you want?" she asked. "To warn Hayes. My aunt has been generous, but there is talk. A man in his grief can be influenced. Clara's family will contest certain arrangements if he disgraces her memory. By employing me, by taking you as more than that." Heat rose in Inez's face, not shame alone, anger too. Fear, because words like contest and arrangements belong to courts, money, land, things that could crush a person without leaving bruises. Pritchard cleared his throat. "Mr. Vale means there are inheritance considerations tied to Mrs. Turner's dowry contribution and Clara had no surviving child." Everett interrupted. "Her portion should return proper if Hayes marries beneath himself." The room sharpened. Inez thought of the small boots on the mantel, of Hayes opening the closed room, of coffee poured before his own, of his hand over hers in the blizzard saying, not letting go. She looked down at the dough and understood something terrible. Staying could cost him land, reputation, peace with the dead, perhaps even the ranch itself, if the papers were cruel enough and the law pliable enough. "I'll tell him you called," she said. Everett's smile grew. He believed he had won because men like him always mistook silence for surrender. When Hayes returned, Inez had supper ready. Bread cooled on the table, coffee, hot, dishes stacked. Her carpetbag sat by the back door. He saw it before he saw her face. "No," he said. She tied the bag shut. "You don't know what I'm doing. I know leaving when I see it. I have wages enough. Mara says I can stay a while. Come summer, I might find work in Rawlins." "No," she turned, anger saving her from tears. "You cannot order me to stay. I'm not." "You said no. I said it to the thing taking you, not to you." That stopped her. Hayes crossed the kitchen slowly. He did not touch the bag. "Who came?" "No one that matters, Inez." The way he said her name nearly undid her. She gripped the back of the chair. "Everett Vale, with a lawyer. He says if this house, if I stay, they might make trouble over Clara's portion, over land, money, I don't know." He said enough. Hayes' eyes went cold. "I am not worth your ranch," she said. His voice was quiet. "You don't get to price yourself in my kitchen. This is exactly why I must go. No, this is exactly why you must tell me the truth and let me stand where I choose. You already lost a wife and child. I won't be the woman who costs you what's left. He looked around the kitchen, blue curtains, bread on the table, eggs in the bowl, muddy boots by the door, apple seedlings green in a cracked cup, his son's drawing now framed simply on the shelf. Then he looked back at her. What's left? He said. The question broke something in both of them. Inez shook her head. Hi. He stepped closer, still not touching. I had land, cattle, a house so quiet I could hear my own heart giving up. You brought bread through a blizzard for people who had nothing to give you. You made coffee and curtains and scolded hens and stood in front of my grief with both hands empty. Don't tell me what's left as if you aren't standing in it. Tears stung her eyes, and she hated them. That sounds too much like needing. Ideas. She looked away. He lowered his voice to almost nothing. Stay, not because you owe me, not because I paid Braddock, not because the world is kind. Stay because this place knows your step now. There was no grand confession, no demand, just the simple sentence and the house breathing around it. And his hand loosened on the chair. I'm afraid, she said. So am I. She laughed once, broken and soft. That is a poor recommendation. An honest one. The carpet bag remained by the door that night. In the morning, Hayes carried it back to her room without comment, and Inez let him. The fight with Everett did not end in the kitchen. Men who come with papers seldom leave, because truth has been spoken. 2 weeks later, a notice arrived. Pritchard claimed Clara's family had grounds to challenge certain transfers made before Clara's death, including funds used to secure a water right and pasture acreage now central to the Turner Ranch. It was thin, Silas said, ugly but thin. Hayes read it once, folded it, and placed it beside his coffee. Inez watched him over the stove. What will you do? Go to town? To a lawyer? To the church hall meeting? That evening, half of Barlow Crossing gathered under the church roof because spring floods had damaged the South Bridge, and every rancher with a wagon had an opinion. Hayes waded through arguments over timber, labor, and cost. Inez sat near Mara, hands folded tight in her lap, feeling Everett's eyes from across the room like burrs. When the bridge talk ended, Hayes stood. The hall quieted. Hayes Turner did not stand in public without purpose. I owe this town words, he said. Inez's stomach dropped. He held his hat in both hands, much as he had the first time she saw him in church. In January, Miss Inez Boone took bread from Braddock's Mercantile during a blizzard. A rustle moved through the room. Inez went cold. Hayes continued. She took it after being refused. She carried it through a storm to feed Widow Pike's children and Mr. Voss. I followed her tracks because I thought I was following a thief. He turned slightly, not enough to expose her, but enough to include her. I found a woman doing what the rest of us should have done before hunger made her desperate. Braddock shifted in the second row, his face reddened. Hayes reached into his coat and took out a small paper. I have here a bill for the bread paid. I have also a list of goods purchased since from suppliers outside this town, because I do not care to trade where hunger is priced higher than mercy. A few men murmured. The sheriff looked at his boots. And I have another thing, Hayes said. Everett leaned back, smiling faintly. Hayes unfolded the notice from Pritchard. Some believe my friendship with Miss Boone dishonors my late wife's memory. Some believe land and money should scare me into putting a good woman out of my house. The hall went still. Inez could hardly breathe. Hayes' voice did not rise. It did not need to. Clara Turner was kind. She fed men who came to our door. She once gave away my winter gloves to a boy with none, and told me my hands were tougher than his. If she has a memory worth honoring, it is not honored by cruelty dressed as family pride. Augusta Vale, seated near the back, closed her eyes. Everett stood. You are embarrassing yourself. No, Hayes said. I did that years ago, when I let grief make me useless to the living." The words hit the room harder than anger. Hayes looked toward Braddock. "Mr. Braddock, you call Inez Boone a thief in the street? You did not ask who the bread was for." "I did not ask soon enough either. I am asking now, in front of this town, that you apologize." Braddock sputtered. "This ain't court." "No, it is smaller and more honest." Someone laughed under their breath. Braddock looked around and found fewer allies than he had expected. Mara stared at him. Thomas beside her stared harder. Old Voss lifted his chin like a judge with poor digestion. Mrs. Bell looked ashamed, though not yet brave. At last Braddock stood stiff as a fence post. "Miss Boone," he said. The words dragged from him. "I spoke harsh." Hayes waited. Braddock swallowed. "I am sorry." Inez felt every eye turn. She stood because sitting felt impossible. "I accept," she said. Braddock started to sit. "But next time a child is hungry," Inez added, voice steady though her knees shook, "open the back door before someone has to run from it." A murmur went through the hall. "Different now?" "Warmer." Everett pushed into the aisle, touching. "But sentiment does not settle property." Augusta Vale stood then. Everett turned, startled. Aunt Augusta, her face was pale, but her voice carried. "No, it does not. But lies do not settle grief either." She looked at Hayes. "Clara's mother received the gown and the brush. She wept over both. Her mouth trembled. She also sent me Clara's last letter. I had not read it until yesterday. From her ridicule, Augusta drew a folded page. Hayes went very still. She wrote that the land and water right were her gift to the life you and Caleb were building. She wrote that, if anything happened to her, you were to keep the ranch whole. She wrote," Augusta stopped, fighting herself. "She wrote that you loved poorly in words but faithfully in deeds, and that she trusted your heart more than your tongue." A soft sound left Hayes. Everett's face darkened. "That letter has no legal." "It has enough," Augusta said sharply, "and I will not lend my name to your grasping." Pritchard, seated behind her, began gathering his papers with professional speed. Everett looked around and saw the room had turned, not violently. Worse for him. Quietly, he left before the closing prayer. Afterward, people did not rush Inez. That was its own mercy. Mara squeezed her hand. Old Voss told her the apology was almost worth leaving his chair for. Mrs. Bell approached last, twisting her apron. "I was unkind," she said. Inez waited. "I rented your room when I should have kept it. You needed money. I needed courage more." Mrs. Bell looked toward Hayes, then back. "There's a quilt at the laundry. Your mother's, I think. You left it in storage years ago." I told myself it was abandoned. It wasn't. Inez could not speak. Mrs. Bell brought it the next day to the ranch wrapped in brown paper. A faded quilt with cornflower squares, worn at the edges, smelling faintly of soap and cedar. Inez spread it over her bed and sat beside it a long time with her mother's thimble in her palm. Spring came as a slow forgiveness. Mud dried into ruts. The creek ran silver. Hens escaped daily and were daily condemned by Inez. The apple seedlings grew 2 brave leaves each. Hayes painted the kitchen door yellow. He did it without warning one clear afternoon, while Inez was planting onions. She looked up to see him with a brush in hand. His shirt sleeves rolled, a streak of yellow across his wrist. "What are you doing? Being a fool with paint?" Her throat tightened. "The whole house?" she asked. "Door first, house after Hying. If you approve?" She looked at the bright door against the weathered boards, absurd and tender under the Wyoming sky. "Caleb would approve," she said. Hayes nodded, unable for a moment to answer. In May, he asked her to walk with him to the south pasture, where wildflowers had begun to show between buffalo grass. He carried no papers, no ring in a velvet box, nothing polished or rehearsed, only his hat in one hand and a nervousness that made him seem younger. They stopped by a repaired fence. Beyond it, cattle grazed with their heads down, alive after winter. The wind moved soft for once. "Inez," he said, "I have loved you badly in silence for some time." She looked at him, startled into a smile that trembled. "That is a very Turner way to begin. I warned you, I'm not practiced." "Oh, keep going." He took a breath. "I won't ask you to be Clara. I won't ask you to mend what I refuse to face. I won't ask you to stay from debt or pity or fear of weather. I'm asking if you will build a life with me because you choose it, with wages if you want them, and your name defended whether you take mine or not." Tears blurred the pasture. "You make proposals sound like contracts," she whispered. "I can try again." "No," she laughed softly. "I understand this one." He waited, hat turning once in his hands. She thought of the girl she had been, holding a brass thimble and a burned corn cake edge. She thought of bread hidden in a blanket, of tracks through blinding snow, of a stove coaxed back to life in a shack full of hungry people. She thought of a man saying not letting go while the storm tried to take her. "I will," she said, "but I keep my thimble." Haya's face changed slowly, like sunrise reaching a closed room. "I wouldn't dare take it," he said. They married in June with the church windows open and the smell of lilacs from jars on the sill. Mara Pike stood with Inez. Silas stood with Hayes and cried so openly that Clem handed him a handkerchief and pretended it was dust. Thomas Pike carried the rings and looked severe with importance. Old Voss fell asleep during the prayer and woke in time to say "Amen" louder than anyone. Braddock sent bread. Inez accepted it, then sent half to the south cabins before the wedding supper began. At the ranch, tables were set in the yard under clear sky. There was coffee, beans, ham, biscuits, dried apple pies, and fresh butter, stamped with a little flour mold Hayes had found in Rawlins. The yellow kitchen door stood open. Blue curtains moved in the window. Clara's small boots remained on the mantel inside, and Caleb's drawing hung beneath them, now joined by a new scrap Thomas had made of hens. A crooked house, 2 tall figures, and a rooster drawn larger than sense allowed. That evening, after guests had gone and the last dish was washed, Inez stood at the kitchen table, drying her hands. Hayes came in, carrying one final armload of wood, though the night was warm enough not to need it. "Habit," he said. "Useful one." She poured him coffee and set a plate before him with a heel of bread spread thick with butter. He looked at it, then at her. "For me?" he asked. "For the rancher who followed my tracks." He sat, and she sat across from him, in the chair that no longer looked like company had been banished. Outside, hens settled with soft complaints. Horses shifted in the corral. The repaired porch held steady under the evening wind. In the garden, onions and peas made small, green promises to the dark. Hayes reached across the table, palm up. Inez placed her hand in his. No storm answered. No hunger called from the road. Only the stove ticking as it cooled. Coffee waiting warm, bread between them, and a house that had learned the sound of 2 people staying. And if anyone asked in later years when love began between Inez Boone and Hayes Turner, some would say it began with a theft, others with a blizzard, and a few with a public apology in a cold church hall. But those who knew the truth would look toward that yellow kitchen door and say love began the night bread, meant for the hungry, was carried through snow, and a lonely man followed the tracks until he found not a thief, but the way home.